Hey, you guys, thank you for joining me today. I am planning on walking you guys through a handful of books today that I have recently read from my past couple months TBRs, but then also a couple books that kind of snuck their way in there that I did not have on my list, but I still really wanted to read. So I hope you enjoy and get a little bit of goodness from what I've read so far, and see if there's anything in this list that maybe you haven't read that you would like to try. Or if there's something in this list that I've read and I give you my opinion on it, I would love to know what you think about it as well, because I'm always interested in hearing other people's thoughts on different authors and particular books and series and things like that. So please, in the comments, let me know as we go through these what you like, what you don't like, and maybe what you're reading right now as well. So the first book that I would like to talk about is Pride, Prejudice, and Peril by Katie Oliver. And this is a cozy mystery set during the springtime, so I thought it would be a perfect time to read this book. And it did not disappoint. I loved the setting of this book. The story was so cute. It had a lot of mystery to it, but at the same time, it was just very sweet and warm and springy. So this book follows Phaedra, who is our main character, and she is a Jane Austen know-it-all. She is a professor at a local college. She knows everything there is to know about Jane Austen, all of her novels, all things Jane Austen. And come to find out that her best friend recently married a man who owns a huge estate. He kind of inherited all of this money and this land and property, and so a reality TV show decides that they want to go film a show on their property at their huge estate in the countryside. The show is called Who Wants to Marry Mr. Darcy? So they bring in Phaedra as the know-it-all expert of everything Jane Austen, and to have her there as someone that they can go to for specific information about how to make this show that much more appealing and period specific. So while she's there, her best friend's husband ends up murdered. And the whole story is Phaedra trying to figure out, along with the police, how he died and who actually killed him. And one thing I really liked about this story is that I just tend to gravitate towards stories where the main character either inserts themselves into the investigation somehow by way of the lead investigator, if there's a romance, or if they just happen to be like at the scene when the investigator shows up, and so it of course makes them look a little bit suspicious, or if they just kind of get a little bit of information on the side. For example, in this story, her best friend's husband is the one who died, so she gets information from her friend that the police may not get here and there, and so she kind of takes that on the side and does her own little investigation. And I just thought this was a really cute story. I gave this one a 3.5-star rating. I think it's just because I'm new to cozy mysteries. I thought it was very cute, but it didn't like wow me. So I still think, I will say, even though this is the lower star rating out of this list, I still would say that I really liked this book. By no means is it one that I did not enjoy. So definitely, I think it's that I'm just used to the thriller sort of genre where there's a lot more grit and fast-paced moving storylines, and so this was just one that I had to kind of get used to as I went along. It moved a little bit slower in pace, but I would still highly recommend, especially since we're still in the springtime and going into the warmer months in the summertime. I think this would be a fantastic book to read. Okay, so this next story, I really enjoyed it. This book is a mystery, and it's called The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. And I gave this book 4 stars. I think it's because the story to me moved a little bit slowly for what I like and what I'm used to, but it was still a really good book. This book follows 4 characters. Our main character is a woman named Freddie, and then you have Cain, Marigold, and Wit. And they are in the Boston Public Library in the reading room, which is this grandiose, beautifully decorated, very, very quiet room in the Boston Public Library where you can go and you can read. And the whole story kicks off with Freddie sitting there at the table, looking around at the people who are around her, specifically these three people that she's sitting at the table with. And she is using them for inspiration in a novel that she is writing. And so she kind of, she gives them nicknames of what they look like or what she would imagine them to be if she were able to talk to them, and starts kind of writing this story out. Well, while they're all sitting there in the reading room, they hear this blood-curdling scream. And they come to find out that there is a woman who has been murdered. And so the story actually unfolds from there, learning a little bit about each one of these characters, maybe what their motivations were, because one of them is actually the murderer. And so the whole time you're trying to figure out who did this. I was wondering, I had thoughts about every single one of these characters. I thought that the author did a really, really good job of leading you down one road, making you think one thing, and then throwing something in there that made you think something else. And so you never really knew. You kind of felt like who's being sincere, who may be pulling the wool over their eyes. And so it was really, really interesting to kind of read the way that she wrote this story out. I will say I was a little bit disappointed in the fact that not more of the story took place in the library. By the title and kind of just by the synopsis, what I was going into it feeling like was going to be more of like a sinister breakfast club where they're all sitting around the table for like the length of the book almost, or they're at least in the library, and they get to sort of talk to each other in that setting, and they're in this forced proximity, and there's fear and trepidation of is potentially this person the killer, and maybe putting like little clues in there to make the characters all feel a little bit uncomfortable around each other. But it didn't really go that way. I don't want to give spoilers away, but I will say that the whole book doesn't take place in the library like I thought it was going to, but there are a lot of twists and turns, a lot of good story and juicy plot lines, and really, really good character development. So I would say this book in particular leaned a little bit more heavily on the story, while the character developments took a back seat. Some people may disagree, but I like a little bit more character development, backstory, things like that. You got it out of a couple of characters, but a couple of the characters also just kind of flew under the radar a little bit. So that's just my personal preference. Didn't really change how I enjoyed the book though. And then the last thing I'll say is that the very, very, very last line in the book, so don't skip to the end, because, well, even if you did, it probably wouldn't make sense to you because you have to read the story to figure this out. But the last line in the book was so good, and I think that the author left the meaning of that line up to the interpretation of the reader. I have my own thoughts about it. If anyone wants to chat about that offline, then please send me a message. I would love to chit chat about it. But I think that after I read that whole story and I had my thoughts about how I felt about the book, then I read that last line and it almost made me look back to the whole story and like it even more. So yeah, I think this was a good one. 4 stars. I would recommend it to thriller and mystery lovers for sure. So this next book that I read and really did enjoy is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. And as everyone knows, Gabrielle Zevin wrote the Book of the Year story for Goodreads last year, which was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. But I read this one first. I am excited after reading this one to pick up Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow because I really, really like this author's writing style. I gave this book 4 stars. I think that after reading this, I realized that I might not be a huge contemporary adult fiction reader. I like something that's a little bit less realistic, if you will. There's a lot of hard-hitting content in this one. There is a trigger warning with loss and there are medical health issues, and it just at times was a very, very heavy story. But it had so many funny and warm-hearted and uplifting parts to it as well. Once I got to the end of the book, it was like, no matter how you live your life, no matter who you come into contact with, there is someone who you will touch along the way and make them feel good and make them feel loved, and just, you never know who you might be leaving a mark on throughout your life. So I just really enjoyed this book. The characters are very likable. I think that the author did a wonderful job in the way that she wrote these characters, where there is a grumpy sort of sunshine trope in this one. I would say more like a grumpy firecracker trope, if that could be a real thing. I'll just make it up right now. So I think that the lead man, AJ Fikry, is definitely a grumpy guy with good reason. But then he meets a woman who really turns things around for him, and she is very optimistic, but yet she is feisty, and she will not let him sort of push her around with his words, because he can sometimes say hurtful things, and she's a very strong woman, and I think that he gravitates towards that and feels comfort in the fact that she is strong and can lift him up. And they're both book lovers. It takes place in a bookshop. I mean, there are so many lovely things about this book. And so, yes, I would highly recommend this one to anyone who maybe would like to read something that is, not so much in the fantasy, but a little bit more realism, and just something that'll make you really have all the feels. My next 4-star read is The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is a YA trilogy, and I think it might have a standalone but connected book about the brothers in this story, I think. But this is the first book in the trilogy, and it's the Hawthorne Legacy trilogy. And I really enjoyed this book. I'm very much looking forward to continuing on in the series, because at the end of this, I still had so many questions. But if you guys will remember in my TBR, I think that I did, it was either April or May, I cannot remember. But I said that this book reminded me a lot of Clue, which is one of my favorite movies from growing up. And also people were comparing it to Knives Out, because there's the family aspect to it. But I think that this really delivered. And it follows a girl named Avery who is just living her life. Unfortunately, she has fallen on hard times. She's living out of her car, just trying to get through high school. And all of a sudden, she finds out that she has inherited billions of dollars from a random man who she has never heard of, never met, never seen, doesn't know anything about his family. And she's like, what in the world? Why am I the person who was chosen for this? Was this a mistake? And she comes to find out that she gets this inheritance, but she has to live in the deceased man's manor for a year before she can actually get her hands on the money. And she's also got 4 grandsons of his that live in that same house who also wanted the money, and they're wondering, why didn't we get the inheritance? And so along the way, there are a lot of clues and things that pop up, and they try to solve this puzzle together in collaboration as to why was she the one that was picked for this. So I loved the fact that the author wrote the house as almost a character in itself. So there were a lot of secret passages and clues and like puzzles in the walls and pictures and books and all this kind of stuff that sort of led them down the road to getting closer and closer to figuring out this puzzle as to why this grandfather decided to give all of this money to this random person. I can tell that at the end of the book, it gave a little bit of some clue as to what's going on, and of course when I read that final last little bit of the book, I was like, oh my gosh, like I did not even realize that. And so when I read that, I was like, yes, I've got to pick up the next one and see what happens here. So I definitely would recommend this book for sure. So this next book, first of all, I think I'm obsessed with this author. This book was not my favorite. I did give it 4 stars, but I recently picked up Lock Every Door from my library by Riley Sager. And I am just about to read The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. But this was the first Riley Sager book that I read. And I will say, love his writing style. His dialogue is perfection. It is exactly the kind of reading style that I like. It's very immersive, makes you feel like you are literally, when 2 people are talking to each other, I felt like I was just sitting there between them, like listening to their conversation, because it just felt so realistic. So this is a thriller, and this story follows Jules, who is really having a tough go. She is very, very desperate because she doesn't have any money. And so she goes to this hotel, the Bartholomew Hotel, and she basically gets hired to stay at this hotel and be paid to live there to basically apartment sit a particular apartment in this hotel. And the catch is that a lot of the people, the residents in this hotel, are movie stars, authors, very famous people, and they like their privacy. And so she has to promise that she won't bring any company over, no spend the night parties. No one can come over and see her apartment. Her friends can't visit. She's not supposed to talk to the other residents in the building because they like to be kind of at arm's length. And so she's getting paid to keep this apartment up, but also to make sure that she is keeping her distance from people. So story goes along, there's a friend of hers living at this apartment that she makes towards the beginning of the book, and that friend disappears. And she starts kind of unraveling this mystery that's taking place, where this friend is not the first person who has disappeared from this hotel. And so she starts going on her own investigation. I really liked Jules's character because she had that very real aspect of being desperate and wanting more for her life and doing what she had to do to give herself the means to be able to live. But she didn't let that stop her from finding the truth. And she was very, very loyal to her friend. She was determined to figure out what happened and to try to save her friend, try to save herself. I think that the story, all in all, I really enjoyed. But when I got to the end where the questions were starting to be answered, that's where it sort of fell apart for me a little bit. I liked the idea that the hotel was being used as a front for something much more sinister that was happening, but the actual reason why it was happening to me felt like such a reach, and I just wasn't crazy about that part of it, but I was willing to sort of overlook that because the rest of the story was so good. And I highly recommend pairing this particular novel with the audiobook because I liked the woman's voice that they used for that, and it just made it so much more engaging. It just amped up the level of suspicion and the fear factor, and so I really, really enjoyed this book. And I think it's one that, even though it didn't hook me from a story perspective, it hooked me from an author perspective. And that says a lot because now I want to go out and continue to read more of Riley Sager's books. So 4 stars for me. But yes, this is one that I think would be a good recommendation simply because of the fact that Riley Sager, I think, is such a good writer. Okay, so this next book I loved. I thought it was so good. And I found this one at my library, and that is The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. And I read the X-Hex first, which I picked up at my library as well, and I really, really enjoyed that book too. Her writing is so funny. It's so funny. I love the way that she writes her dialogue. She makes you feel the embarrassment that people may feel. She makes you feel the love that people feel, the awkwardness, the determination, and the need to succeed. I mean, anything that she writes, to me, I feel like I'm feeling that emotion that the characters are feeling. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I would actually love to reread this book, maybe around Halloween time, because I'm glad I read it now, because I'm trying to get through a list of like spooky Halloween fall season books now, so that come Halloween time, actual spooky season, I can read more of like the really scary horror, deep suspense, thriller type of books on my list. But would love to read this one again. So this book follows Gwen and Wells, and Gwen's family power is sort of the lifeline for the town of Graves Glen that she lives in, which is in Georgia. And Wells is a part of the most powerful witch family to exist, and his family lives in Wales. Well, his father sends him to Graves Glen to sort of keep an eye on things and check on the power of the town. And while he's there, he opens up his own shop for tourists and locals, where he's selling grimoires and candles and all different kinds of witchy things, but without the magic for the most part. And he sets up shop right across the street from Gwen, who already has Something Wicked, which is her shop, mostly geared towards tourists, with a lot of kind of kitschy trinkets and things like that. And she just cannot stand this guy at first. They are complete opposites. They love to get at each other and make each other go just completely crazy and pick at each other, which is such a fun way to start a love relationship. It's very, very much an enemies to lovers story, and I thoroughly enjoyed. It was very believable the way that they came to have feelings for each other, where they sort of went from enemies to friends because they needed each other's help, and then to lovers. And a lot of the time I feel like authors can just jump from enemies to lovers so quickly, and you can't understand how they got there. I think Erin Sterling did a really, really good job with her story on kind of letting that unfold naturally. And this book takes place around Halloween, and so it's a perfect time during October or even September to read this book. But it was so well written in the way that she wrote her atmosphere and about the town, and I just felt like, I could hear the leaves crunching under their feet as they're walking between stores in the middle of the town square. It just was so warm and cozy. And I will say it is an open door romance novel, so it gets very spicy, which is so different from the Ex-Hex, because in my opinion, I think that one was more of a closed door romance. So know going into this one that you do get a little bit of the love from these two characters as you read, but all in all, it was really, really good. I will say the only thing I didn't care for was how this book seemed like it's supposed to be the sequel to the Ex-Hex, yet the characters started out where Gwen in the Ex-Hex was dating Reese, which was Wells's brother, and they had a very hot romance too. And then he goes home to Wales, and when this book starts, she is liking Wells, his brother, and her cousin Vivi is actually married to Reese, which is the man that she had a relationship with in the first book. I didn't quite jive with that. I thought it was kind of weird. I was really, really hoping this was going to be a continuation of Gwen and Reese's relationship, but that didn't happen. However, I think I like Wells's character even more. So even though I think that this is kind of more of a standalone novel, using the same characters in the same setting, but not really a true sequel of the Ex-Hex, continuing on with that story, I still think that I liked this one even better. So 100% read it. Yes, love it. Witchy vibes all the way. So Bookathon, the readathon that is put on by Kindle at Bookphoria, Hope at Hope on the Coast, and Keisha at A Book Like You just ended, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing that readathon. It was actually my first readathon that I've ever done, not just since I've been on BookTube, but like ever. And I loved it because it was like all of us in the book community were reading the same books at the same time, or the same type of genre at the same time, and it just felt like a community building fun little exercise. And so I really enjoyed it. It was a spooky middle grade readathon, and so the first book that I picked was a reading prompt that was something that scares you, and so I decided to grab Small Spaces by Katherine Arden and picked this one up in my library. I actually grabbed this one about a month ago and decided that I wasn't going to read it at the time because I had so many other books to read, and then Bookathon came around and I thought, perfect, I'll pick this one back up again. And of course, because of the scarecrows, that is my fear. I am absolutely terrified of scarecrows. They look like they could literally attack you at any minute, or that they could possibly be a human being just sitting there on a stick waiting to grab you. So I thought that this one was perfect. This story follows Ollie and Brian and Coco, and our main character is Ollie. There is a trigger warning for loss because her mother has actually passed away before the story begins. And she's going on a field trip with her middle school to a local farm where they're supposed to learn about how a farm works. And while they're there, she kind of starts to learn more detail about this mystery, this story, this urban legend that is all about a story that she's reading in a book. And the book is called Small Spaces. And so I don't want to give too much away, but this story takes place right around Halloween, so it's a perfect fall book. Bookathon, I think, may come back around in the fall as well, so this would be a great one to pick up at that time. But this is the first middle grade book that I can remember reading in a long, long time, and I liked it because it's very short. It did not take me long at all to read. I did pair it with the audiobook. I really liked the audiobook too, so I would recommend pairing that with this book. But it got me, you guys. Like, the way that Katherine Arden writes, it's so chilling. And as I was sitting on my couch reading this one night before my husband came home, did not even hear the garage door open, and he came in through the basement door, and I was like, and literally, I'm reading a middle grade book, and I was scared out of my mind when he walked in the door. So this one was so fun. I highly recommend this one to anyone who likes a little bit of scare but doesn't like quite the adult horror genre. Go pick this one up for sure, because it was 4.5 stars for me, for sure. So one other book that I read for Bookathon that I also loved, and thank you Keisha and Hope and Kindle for opening up my world to middle grade spooky books, because this was such a fun time for me. But I read What Lives in the Woods by Lindsay Curry, and it was so fun to read this as the buddy read for Bookathon. We actually had a book discussion with the author, so Lindsay Curry got on video chat and kind of explained what the book was about, how she wrote it, why she wrote it, where her inspiration came from, and it was such a fun, cool experience to be able to read this and then hear her talk about that. So if you didn't get a chance to participate in Bookathon this spring, then definitely check it out in the fall. I highly recommend it. But this book follows Jenny, who is I think she might be like 13, 12, something like that. And she is going to, with her family, to a remote home that is supposedly haunted. And her dad is going to try and fix the place up so that hopefully it can be rented out for events and parties and things like that. But until he makes it a little bit more friendly and a little bit less completely terrifyingly spooky. They are living there so that he can get that work done. And while they are there, Jenny starts having these really creepy things happen to her. She has to deal with a mannequin in her room. There is like scratching outside of her window. She thinks she sees stuff in the woods. She hears music playing in the walls. I mean, it literally, like, if this happened to me, I would be running back home. She's a very strong, very brave little girl. And one of the things I love the most about this book is that Lindsay Curie incorporated Agatha Christie into the book. And I am a huge Agatha Christie fan. Obviously, you guys know I'm a mystery girl. And so the fact that that was in there made it all the more appealing to me. Jenny wants to be a writer. Agatha Christie is her role model, her idol. She absolutely loves using her as inspiration for her writing style. And so she kind of takes that as motivation to try and figure out this mystery and what's going on. And she pairs up with a local boy who lives there and works at the local ice cream shop. And they spark up a little bit of a cute romance while they're working on this together. And she also works alongside her brother. And I loved her brother and her relationship. They started out as typical brother-sister, relationships do, where they're poking at each other and he's trying to scare her and she gets frustrated and she thinks he's dumb and, all those fun things with brother-sister young relationships. But then all that gets put aside and you can tell when they're trying to figure this mystery out, they will do whatever it takes to protect each other. They work together. It's just such a fun family aspect to the story. So 4.5 stars on this one. I think I might be a spooky middle grade girl going forward. This pretty much seals the deal for me. Okay, so this next book is not going to come as a surprise to anybody, the fact that I loved it as much as I did, and that is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. And this is my first Sarah J. Maas book ever. So please don't come at me, but I am now officially on the train. There's so much Sarah J. Maas that I need to read and I want to read, but I had to start somewhere. So I really, really loved this book. I would give this one 4.5 stars for sure. So this book takes place following Selena, and she is a very, very well-known professional assassin. So she joins a competition at the King's Kingdom where she has to compete against not only a bunch of other assassins, but men. So she's the only female in this competition, and she is by far the best. And she has to go through these different trials and things to be able to prove that she is the best out of all of them. It is, you win or you die trying kind of competition. And so I thought it was really cool, almost like a Hunger Games style plot line, but then also had another subplot line where there is something really sinister and evil that lives in the castle, and she is in a way haunted by this, and this thing, whatever it is starting to attack people who are in the competition. And so she goes on her own sort of investigation of what is happening here and can I stop it? And so while she's trying to survive this competition, she's also trying to survive this evil that lives in the castle, to become ultimately the king's assassin for his kingdom. In order to do that for about 5 or 6 years, and then she gets her freedom from being a slave for the kingdom. So there's so much more story to be told here. When it ended, I will say I was really hoping for a little bit more of a cliffhanger at the end of this book, but I do know that there are like many books in this series, so there's a lot of story to be told, and understandable why not every book is necessarily going to have a huge cliffhanger on it. I just love the fact that we have a strong female lead. She's obviously going to have some romance in this. There are 2 men who are somewhat vying for her attention. One is much more direct, one is a little bit more under the radar. So you have Dorian and Chol, or Cole. I could not decide how to pronounce his name, but Chol or Cole. If you know, please let me know how you pronounce that name. But I have my personal preference on which one I want her to be with, at least by the end of this book. That may change. There may be another man that's introduced. I don't know. But all in all, Sarah J. Maas, girl, you know what you're doing. This book was great, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series. 4.5 stars. Yes. Okay, so now we enter into the 2 5 stars that I have read over the past couple of months. And the first one is For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing. I have heard mixed reviews about this book. I've heard that Samantha Downing is, all in all, a very well-liked author, but this book in particular, I think you like it or you don't, and I fall into the like it pool. It's a thriller, and I love thrillers, which may be one reason why I love it so much. This book follows Teddy, who is a professor at a private high school, and his goal in life is to be the best that he can be, win all the awards, be teacher of the year, push students to their fullest. And if that means that the cost of making sure that that happens is having to step on the toes of overbearing parents and people he can't stand and other teachers and maybe killing someone along the way, then heck, he's going to do what he's got to do. It's that kind of book, guys. So I think that it is a really, really good story, the way that it unfolds. I really like how there are a handful of characters throughout the story, and along the way, they're all suspecting somebody else for what's happening, because there are a handful of murders that take place during this story. And it's funny to see as the reader, and you're reading the story from the perspective of Teddy, a murderer, instead of maybe like the detective or something like that, someone who's maybe like one of the students on the side who's just seeing this happen. You're actually reading it from the perspective of Teddy, and he's looking around and he's got other teachers and parents and even students who are thinking, it's this person, and then that person's pointing at the other person, and then that person's pointing at someone over here, and he's just sitting back going, I'm doing this and getting away with it, and you don't even know. So I thought that that part of the story was really cool and really fun and different from kind of some of the other thrillers that I've read before. One of the things that I did miss in this book was being able to have a character that I did really, really like, that I wanted to root for, that I wanted to win in the end. That doesn't exist. No one is good in this story. And then the end of this book left my head like spinning. It was so crazy. This story was so crazy. I felt the whole time like I was just in this whirlwind and I didn't know what was going on. And at the end, I did feel a little bit deprived of how I wanted the book to end. I was hoping for one certain thing to happen. That didn't happen. It ended up ending a different way. Did not take away from the fact that I loved this book. I loved everything about this book. And this may be one that I go back and reread again. I know for sure that I will be picking up more of Samantha Downing's novels. If you have a recommendation for me on the next one for Samantha Downing that I should pick up, please let me know, because I haven't started looking into other novels yet, and I would love to know which one you guys think would be the best next Samantha Downing novel for me to grab. And then this last book, another 5-star for me, was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And this is a Gothic thriller. I did not realize that I was going to like this book as much as I did. I haven't read a lot of books that kind of are surrounded by the Hispanic culture. I think this book took place in New Mexico. I can't really remember because it's been a couple months since I read it, but it was so immersive the way that Silvia Moreno Garcia wrote this. I felt like I was there with the main character. Her name was Noemi, and this whole book centered around Noemi going to live with her cousin and her cousin's husband at this enormous estate, a very Gothic house, very spooky. They have a team of people that are working for them. in the garden, in the kitchen, servants, butlers, that kind of thing. And when she gets a note one day about her cousin feeling like she may be going crazy in this house, she feels sick all the time, she thinks someone may be trying to hurt her. Her dad sends her to live with her cousin, but sort of under the radar about why she's there, so that of course it doesn't look like she's being suspicious of people, and then they act like nothing's wrong when she's there. So she didn't want to give anything away before she goes. So she goes to stay with her cousin and her cousin's husband, and while she's there, crazy things happen. She starts kind of kindling a romance with one of the sons of the caretakers that live there, and I just really like the characters. All in all, even the secondary characters that were smaller, that didn't get a lot of page time, she did such a good job of writing them in a way that I felt like I knew them, even in the small amount of time that I actually got to read about them. And especially with Noemi, I felt like the story started off with her sort of this socialite from where she comes from, very self-centered, very, very selfish, just so annoyed at the fact that she has to go stay with her cousin to try to help her figure out whether or not she's going crazy. And she gets there and she starts seeing that there is some really weird stuff happening in this house that's unexplainable and shouldn't be happening, and is believing what her cousin was saying in her letters, that maybe there is something really bad going on here with this family in this house. And so throughout the course of the book, she starts changing and her character grows a lot, and she becomes very loyal to her cousin, very determined to help her figure out what is going on. She does not let anybody push her around. So a very, very strong female lead, which I always love. It's just really nice to see her kind of come to a place where she's caring more for others than she is for herself. And another thing I love about this book, and I've read a few books like this. The Inheritance Games, actually, that I just talked about, is one that I sort of kind of put into this category of having a house that is like a character in itself. You feel like when the author is writing that you can feel the paint coming off of the walls. You can hear the things coming through the walls. You can smell the smells that she feels like she's smelling, and it's just gross and weird, and it seems so dilapidated, and it just adds to the creep factor, and I love it. I love when you get that atmospheric type of writing, and it just makes the story so much more engaging and just putting you like literally right in the middle of the story. That is my favorite type of book. So having a house that comes alive and feels like a character in itself, just as much as the people who are characters in the story, is so much fun to read. The ending really took me by surprise. It was a little bit crazy, but to be honest, it worked with the rest of the story, because the things that were happening in the build-up through the story, it was all just absolutely out of this world crazy. And so to get the ending that you did, it fit, it made sense. And to me, this book was 5 stars all the way. I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to pick up more books by this author. If you were looking for a good Halloween sort of scary, spooky season book, definitely I would recommend this one, because it has all those spooky, scary vibes. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you got some good information and some good recommendations from me on things to read. If you haven't already, if you have anything that you want to share with me as I'm starting to build my June TBR already, which I cannot believe that we're already going into the summertime. So I am really, really looking forward to reading some good, like specifically summer set books, some summer romances. I would love to pick up like a good YA summer romance that's sort of like The Summer I Turned Pretty, but not that series, because I've already watch the show and I want to read something that's kind of new and fresh. So if you have a recommendation like that, I would love to know. And the other one that I'm really interested in is something like Pretty Little Liars, because that seems like a really, really fun summer kind of like thriller type of book. And so if you have any recommendations for me on those types of things, or anything else you can think of that would be good for the summertime, especially like maybe going into Summerween, which is coming up soon, let me know. I'm always looking for good recommendations, and hopefully you got a good recommendation from this video. Thank you guys for coming, and if you've watched this far, an extra big thank you to you. And I very much look forward to seeing you guys in my next video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And remember to click the notification bell so that when I have my next video go up, you will know when that happens. I look forward to seeing you guys again soon, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks. Bye.